Silent Hill 2's remake is finally out. It came out a few days ago, and I wanted to give my first impressions in an is it worth buying review. Now, this is not a full review of the entire game, it's just from the multiple hours I have played it, but this is a game I really like that I definitely wouldn't mind making a few more videos on, including maybe a full review, so you can let me know if you want to see that as I continue to make my way through the game. Now, this game is longer than the original Silent Hill 2, and the original Silent Hill 2 was made in-house by Konami back in the PlayStation 2 era. When Silent Hill 2 came out, and this is from someone who's a huge retro game fan, it was honestly the pinnacle of a lot of the technology at the time, especially on the PS2. Silent Hill 3 pushed it even further, especially graphically. They did an amazing job. But Silent Hill 2 and 3 and even 1 to some extent, they've never really been brought up to more platforms. Silent Hill 1 got brought up to PS3, however, its digital edition has a lot of problems, especially at the end of the game. I played through it on my Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays. The link is in the description down there, but the end game boss just completely broke for me, and I guess that's common. And this is something that's very common with the Silent Hill games, is the few times they have been brought up to later platforms, they were a mess. It's unfortunate because this whole series fell apart in many ways after the original Silent Hill 4. Team Silent was no longer working on them, so many people had left, and Konami just kind of moved it to external Western studios, and then Silent Hill just kind of slowly began a bit of a decline. There are some good things there in those Western games, but they're not Silent Hill 1 through 4. So going into this, I think a lot of people had a lot of worries about this. It was no longer internal at Konami. They had been through Western Silent Hills before, and they were looking at this external team Bloober and saying, how would they be able to recapture the magic that was this game? And what are they going to ruin? So I want to talk about this today because I do have a very strong opinion on this so far. But going into it, I was one of the people hopeful that this would be good. And honestly, I'm not disappointed by what we got. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it, and I've got a lot of thoughts. So if you enjoy this video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments down below. That does always help. Also, I do have a question of the day for you, which is there a game you would want remastered, remade, or even just normally ported to modern day hardware? Now, Silent Hill 2's remake being external, whereas Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, the remake of MGS3, being internal, was also a discussion going into this, and I do think it was a fair one. What I don't think was fair is that going into this game, yes, there were going to be some changes, like for example, the camera perspective. That was my biggest worry. And there was going to obviously be more of like a focus on modern day graphics. But I don't think it's fair that there was a subset of people who genuinely wanted this to fail and they were not open to it being good. I know I'm not going to be able to convince those people, and before you say they don't exist, I think they just proved that they did a few days ago when this game came out to rave reviews, and people felt the need to go in and borderline vandalize the Wikipedia page about this game by trying to erase the official reviews and change them all to negative scores. Like, there's a lot of people around this game that want to be mad, and I get that there's no convincing some of those people. I think it's unfortunate, but it's how it is. But I think this game is actually really good. You know, I worry when you're going into a game and you're changing this camera perspective. On the one hand, I feel like it sends a bad message because you can absolutely still make that type of game. That would be my biggest criticism with this game, is that I wish that they did what Konami is doing with Metal Gear Solid Delta, where it's going to have its original camera perspective, and the game is balanced for that, but it's also going to have a fixed camera perspective, and the game is balanced for that. I'm not sure if that's harder to do with a horror game, where you have enemies going and hiding behind stuff and trying to jump scare you, but I do know that in the original game, there was very specific cinematic shots planned out, as James would walk into a room and there would only be so much you could see. I do think Silent Hill's remake, Silent Hill 2's remake, actually does a really good job of preserving that feeling while being a different camera angle. And the reason I'm focusing on this is this was my biggest concern with the game. Do I still wish they had the fixed as well? Yeah, absolutely. I get that would be a lot of work though, and I think that something they did really well was preserving this limited visibility as James walks into a room, whether he has the flashlight or early game doesn't, and there are things you can't see. The actual, radio interference sound that usually plays in Silent Hill games when you're near an enemy will play out of the DualSense controller on the PS5. It's very unsettling. It's something that's very like, oh, you're on edge now, and you know, oh man, there's enemies around me, but I don't know where they are. I have no idea where they are, and this room is pretty dark. I think that's a feeling that they preserved very well from the original game, where you don't have the same camera angle, but you have the same feeling as a player. You have the same experience in a different way. These aren't things that I was 100% sure they would be able to do. I thought this game would be good from previous Bloober games like Layers of Fear and things like that, and the fact that they had a blueprint laid out for them, literally in the previous release of this game. But I didn't know if they would be able to stick that same feeling while changing that. Now, at the end of the day, I do think it would be amazing if someone did what they did for Resident Evil 2 Remake on PC, and there was like some extensive mod also adding in those fixed camera angles. But I love the way that they did it here. There are going to be some gripes with this game in terms of like different mechanics. I think that this game does a very good job of making combat difficult, the way it was supposed to be in the original Silent Hill 2 and the original Silent Hill games, but in a different way. I've noticed that I get more overwhelmed in this game, not just from enemy numbers, but from enemy intelligence than I felt like I did in the original Silent Hill 2. It feels to me like enemies are able to kind of move around this 3D space in ways that are sometimes predictable and sometimes unpredictable. And I think that it works very well with the balancing for the game. I think one of the biggest criticisms I've seen online is the mechanic that like you can shoot an enemy in the leg to knock that enemy down. But it also ignores the fact that there were lots of different ways, whether it be weapons or play styles that people have gotten good at doing over the years on the classic Silent Hills that can absolutely cheese the game. In fact, there's even one weapon that you can get kind of like late game that they, I don't want to say removed, repurposed would be a good way to say it, in this game to avoid that kind of cheesing, because it would have been something that would have been too usable to break the game in this. Does that make sense? Like, I think that they went through and they did pretty meticulously balance a lot of things. And I think that they did a very good job with that. When I'm playing this game, I don't feel like James is Chris Redfield or Leon Kennedy or Jonathan Call of Duty or any of these, you know, military type characters from throughout either horror or FPSs or anything like that. He's not perfect at it. It reminds me a little bit of the way that it's done in The Last of Us, you know, with Joel, where it's like you can get good at combat, but you're not a super action hero. You're not Rambo. And you do have limited resources, and if you're playing like an idiot, you're gonna die. You really are going to die. Or at least come very, very close and have to brute force your way through with health drinks. Speaking of health drinks, that's something I really like about this game, is I've noticed there's a lot more exploration of the Silent Hill town itself. You know, being able to go around and open drawers, being able to go into different rooms that you could never get into in the original while not compromising the story, that's one of the things I would actually say is done better in this game. Now look, there's plenty of things that the original Silent Hill 2 does better as well, but this is something that I would say the remake does better. It feels like you're actually trapped in this town and you are meticulously exploring every single place you can get to. In the original game, you were doing the same thing, but there was a lot less you could get to. There was a lot less areas and different things you could find. Even some of the notes and connections I've found to other Silent Hill games in the canon are really, really interesting. I don't want to ruin them, but for example, there's even one ending that Bloober Team added. They did not subtract any endings, they added 2 endings. And one of those ties directly into the White Claudia substance found in Silent Hill 1, and even, you know, kind of tying into Silent Hill 3. I found a direct reference to Silent Hill 4 that I found very interesting. My point being that I think that these people who made this game, they were fans of Silent Hill. They were people who went through, they understood the source material, they understood the games, and they tried to recreate those same feelings and even add connections into the game, where if you were a hardcore Silent Hill fan, you'll find these Easter eggs, or you'll find these hints or these little notes and things, newspaper clippings, etc., and you'll say, hey, I know that character. Hey, I know what that is. And someone's thinking, oh great, like a bunch of MacGuffins, a bunch of like they did the things. No, really, it's pretty intentional. It's not all the time, it's rare, but I have come across about 2 or 3 connections to other games that I think are done very well. Some things are obviously preserved from the original Silent Hill 2, but also some are added in on top of it, and really, they don't take things away. There are characters that I think were the source of controversy when this game originally came out. I found myself in a position where it was like, I just said, hey, I want to wait and see, with characters like Angela, for example, who was a victim of a lot in this game without getting into heavy spoilers, and before this game as well. Or even characters as well like Maria, where her clothing, her attire was just a little different. And I remember a lot of people were very, very ready to jump on the game for that and kind of tear it to shreds. And my point was just, let's wait and see if they actually understood who these characters are. You know, if they release Maria into this game and they changed her attire and what she represents in the narrative and who she was in the narrative was totally different, I'd say, well, Bloober blew it. They didn't do that. These characters very clearly represent what they did in the original. They very clearly stand for what they did in the original. And I would argue there's nothing here that compromises who those characters are. If I had to criticize anything in terms of like an actual, just full on, I would say objective criticism, not even subjective. We're talking about like the technical limitations of the game now. We're talking about how well the game runs. That would be what I criticize. Like, I think this game runs well. I think that it, especially in performance mode, it looks good enough. Like, the graphics are good, and I'm able to play the game with very little stuttering, you know, very little issues, etc. But you pretty much have to go into performance mode to avoid a very, very strong motion blur in the game when you turn, and to have a good frame rate. Now, if it just stayed at 30 FPS locked and there wasn't like a bad motion blur on the graphics mode for the normal PS5, no idea what it'll be on PS5 Pro, and I didn't play it on PC. But I do know PC players said that that was an issue for them too, in terms of like the motion blur. I know that motion blur to this extent makes a lot of people feel sick. Like, I was seeing tons of people on Reddit talk about this, people in YouTube comments, etc., just saying like, hey, the amount of motion blur on this game, it genuinely makes me feel nauseous. And that's something that doesn't bother me as much, but I certainly could tell what they meant. You know, when you're on graphics mode, like the fidelity, basically the mode that's preserving that, you know, just the looks. If you're on that mode, it sucks to me because it's like you can see inside certain buildings better, especially in the early game when James doesn't have the flashlight. But when you go into performance mode, I feel like it's a much better experience in terms of its performance. Like, it's a more fluid frame rate. You're not having nearly the same amount of motion blur when you're turning the camera. I feel like the combat is more responsive, but early game especially, there's certain areas that are just too dark. It makes it really hard to see in certain parts of the game. And I would just say, oh, well, it's a dark game, you know, oh, it's a horror game, turn up your brightness. But that doesn't really work as an explanation when in graphical mode, you can see those areas perfectly fine. I guess I just wish that we weren't still at that point. Like, if I was playing this on graphical mode, it just hurts my eyes, especially when I'm turning. But some people it doesn't. So I don't know, that's just kind of me. That's like my main gripe with the game. Overall, I think it's definitely worth buying. I think it's a very good horror game. I do think that it's really sad that Silent Hill 1, 2, 3, 4, even Origins, they're not very accessible in the modern day. Like, it's harder to get your hands on them, they're overpriced, or you have to just emulate them on PC. I think that that's really too bad because, like, I think a lot of the lashing out of around this game, if things like the PS3 edition of like Silent Hill 2 and 3 HD remastered, you know, if Konami hadn't lost the source code, which they did, and they hadn't given an incomplete build to their teams to work on, which they did, so that was a mess. I think if a game like that existed still and had been ported up to like PS4 or something, where you could still access the original version of this game in just as good of a release as the original, I think a lot of the outcry around this would have been quiet. I think that it really didn't help Bloober that they were put in a position where people felt like this was going to be a replacement for Silent Hill 2. You know, that the original game didn't matter anymore. And I think that if it hadn't been treated that way by Konami in the past, I think this would have been received better by the subset of fans who were upset leading up to its release, and the subset of that subset who's still upset at its existence now. It's not the same exact game, I get that, but I also don't think it's like a modern reimagining where they just take some names and some locations and they butcher it, you know, and I think it's too bad that that's what people expected. This game seems to be selling very well. I think it's very good. I think it deserves a chance, and I look forward to, you know, getting more into it in a full in-depth review. If you enjoyed this video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I always appreciate that. We do have a Fortnite code, which does help us out a lot. I don't know if there's any crossover between Silent Hill players and Fortnite players other than me, but I play a lot of different games, so I'm going to flash that on the screen right here now. And that code, DJAY123, can also be used on our store, CosmoBunny.shop, where we sell coasters, keychains, trays, even handmade jewelry. Now the coasters, keychains, trays, all this stuff, it's made from repurposed comic books and manga that have been damaged. They're not able to be sold by stores. We keep them out of landfills. We make transformative art with them for your home, and we hope you enjoy that very much. We love what we do there, and we love and appreciate your support. I also want to say a big thank you to some of my members. I'm going to flash that right here. Hope you have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shway.